Anybody, any question in the audience?
Would love your perspective on how content licensing is evolving around the world. I think technically we have the capability, but it sounds like the content licensing guys are still archaic, in terms of how they license stuff around the world. How's that world going to change?
Well, this one is probably the part of the business, the unseen part of the business, which I've spent the most time on in the last 10 years, is negotiating licensing deals for territories, for brands, for different parts of the ecosystem, handset versus operator versus whoever it may be. There's so many different ways of cutting a deal because this is where the revenue comes for the content owner. And it's a really important, really sensitive part. If we look at the World Cup specifically, it's a huge money-making thing for FIFA, and they are incredibly careful about how they roll out the rights. I understand for Singtel, they have the mobile rights as well as the TV rights at the moment. The only thing that's forcing them to give that content to StarHub is the Singapore mediation rule, which means they have to provide the exclusive content to StarHub users as well. So that's quite an interesting change in the dynamic. So even if naturally in a competitive market it doesn't quite work out, then government regulation can perhaps force ubiquitous access to content.
Yeah. And just to add, I think like everyone in the food chain, from the creator to the final distributor to the consumer, I think the studios, for example, or the rights to the content the rights owners need to evolve. And with multiple opportunities to monetize come multiple windows. And then they have to, ultimately they have to run it as a business and make sure that they're not cannibalizing on their existing revenues. But if there's an opportunity to monetize with a new window, for example, the DVD home video business, that was a whole big chunk of rights 10 years ago, and that's pretty much dwindled. And on-demand transactional VOD has become a big part of that, whether it's through an iTunes or another online retailer. So it's in constant state of flux. But I think the studios and the rights owners hold a big part of this in terms of evolving and ensuring that they cut and dice the windows in a manner that's ultimately going to benefit not only the other parts of the food chain, but the consumer as well.
Thanks. You mentioned piracy and free content, but how are you finding the way that consumers buy or purchase or use content that's not broadcast content or not created content is influencing the way that they buy broadcast content, if that makes sense? Are their buying or purchase behaviors changing about what they want, what they expect?
Well, I think consumers by and large know what is produced amateurly by someone else to share and watch versus what is produced professionally. I don't think there's a blur out there. But then it comes down to habit. Okay, if you look at
like consumption, the way they consume it.
Yeah.
In volume and frequency.
Yeah, so exactly. So let's take for example YouTube, and you have amateur content available there and people can share and watch as many times as they want. And that works well for Google because every time they watch, they make some ad revenue and that gets shared by the content creator. But then you look at legitimate content that's illegitimately available there. People will continue to watch it as long as it's available. And that's where this whole issue comes down. The habit is there. And whether it's created amateurly or professionally, if it's free and easily accessible and no regulation and nothing's done about it, then it's going to really kill the industry. And I don't think there's someone says, oh, I'll watch this amateur content on YouTube, but if professionally created content's available, I won't watch it there.
I think probably the most interesting behavioral change that has been logged in the USA was from Netflix watching the behavior of so-called binge viewing, and the viewers actually preferring to watch episode after episode after episode after episode until they get to an end of a series in one weekend, in one day, in 1 week, thereby suggesting that the time schedule management of content that we've gone through for the last 50-odd years changed, obviously given the TiVo moment a few years ago, to a point where now people are expecting to be able to indulge themselves when they wish to. And the technology is there to make that happen. And I think that more and more people are just going to consume in lumps rather than as and when it's distributed to them.
Can I say one more? So how does that change the way you, like you said about the way you create content then? So I might want to watch 2 minutes on the train or 20 hours in a row. Does that change the way you create content, or is it you just keep going with the same formula of the packages?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a kind of middle years where mobisodes were created and things like that, and it was trying to adopt to that particular style of device and behaviour. But given let's talk about the broadband world and the tablet world, and I look at the people on the MRT watching the Korean dramas right now. I mean, they're not really watching 2-minute bits. They're actually watching the whole thing. Either they've downloaded it or they're streaming it because the quality's there. So I think if you have a passion about a particular show or content, you will binge on it as long as you can.
Do you think the model has to change a little bit, though? I mean, sometimes when you talk about, people, and piracy, a lot of that is driven by what they see as a sort of I suppose, an unfair way of distributing the content. I mean, in the music world, it was, you had to buy an album, but I don't like all the songs on the album. Then iTunes kind of disrupted that and said you can buy one song. I know that when I pay my StarHub, I have a whole load of channels I don't want. And Louis C.K. went out and broke the model a little bit by saying, I'm not going to use any of the networks or TV shows. I'm going to put it on the internet. You can buy it for $5 and then do whatever you want with it afterwards. And he made a lot of money doing that. And I think that was kind of a bit of a disruptive event that he created. And do you think that has to happen to sort of single purchase scenarios? And does that destroy the model?
Well, very interesting question. This is something we talk about all the time in our industry. It comes down to economics. When you talk about linear channel, traditional TV, 100 channels available in your home or 200 channels, and you pay $50 in an expensive place like Singapore, or maybe $5 in a place like Vietnam, for the same type of service. The question here is, if you were to only buy the 5 channels you wanted, would the economics come in at the same price, or would it come in at a higher price? And the reality is, if you try to break, it's the reality. Every home has 100 plus channels, and every home doesn't watch more than 3 to 4 or 5 channels at best. But if you were to just buy those 5 channels at your flick of your button anytime, you may find that the a la carte pricing actually ends up far more expensive because it's not amortized over a large base. So that's the economics of it. Coming down to really the experience of piracy, I think the music example is bang on. If there are barriers created where people will be forced to say, I really don't want 19 songs of an album and I want one, and iTunes goes and revives that, that's awesome. If the television, or I would not say television, but the audio-visual content business continues to do that or tries to make barriers happen, then it's going to also fail, and piracy is going to disrupt it, or pure OTT players are going to disrupt it far more. And hence, this time we are in remains so critical that this whole ecosystem embraces it, knowing that it can be badly disrupted if they don't follow ease of offering, multiple platforms of offering, day and date, for example, in US series, shortening of windows for movies, Hollywood movies, or any other movies, a lot of things. They have to do everything that the pirates are doing. If you can't beat them, join them. If they're making things available easily, we in the industry need to find ways of legitimately making it available to these consumers if we want to survive in the long run.
Yeah, so with this trend of people going on to internet TV, getting their content anytime and from anywhere they want, like you said earlier, from US or from China, Hollywood, or whatever. So where do we, from an agency standpoint, come into this big picture? How do we target our audience, since like a consumer from Singapore can log in, can just hop onto a US website, and then there's no way we can.
Well, I think technology comes to the rescue here, because there are so many integrated advertising platforms all over the world that you can actually buy these eyeballs from if it's online. And there's going to be a conversation on programmatic buying. Every time someone from Singapore clicks on content, and they are tracked as doing so through this virtual IP, and I think the Netflix guys obviously register that and then represent that to their real-time bidding network, then you can buy that ad. You can hit that person regardless.
But I want to add one thing. The VPN is a gray area. The rights that Netflix has is for U.S. audiences. The fact that you hide your IP, your identity or where you're coming from, you may not be breaking any laws because someone's providing you a service where you can hide yourself. But in reality, the content you're consuming has not been paid for in your market. It has not been paid for rights to distribute in this territory. And it's a bigger issue. But from an advertising perspective, one option is what Colin suggested. And that's one of the reasons when a lot of media agencies are targeted about why they end up buying traditional media and continuing to spend on it. It's because at least there are some metrics that they can identify very clearly that this is in this market and this is the data I get for this market legitimately. So it's a bit of a gray area from that perspective.
I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying the technology is there to enable you to track those users.
If we figure out barriers to stop it, there's no barriers to stop it. People will go. 50% of Singapore is pirating actively right now. So it's not like people will go. They are going right now. The point I'm trying to make is the legitimate side of the business. The industry has to do something to make it easily available. If they are going and using a VPN to go out and get it in the US, then it's the industry's responsibility to make it available on the same day and date, if possible, at the right economic model in that place so that people are disincentivized to go out there. So it's an industry problem, and there's no way we can fight it if we don't deliver those solutions in the market.